The Mothman's shadow. I didn't believe in the Mothman. At least I didn't want to believe. I grew up in the town where the stories were passed around like old coins, used, worn, and forgotten by most. But there was always that one kid who swore they saw something in the sky, or that one old man who'd look out at the woods and mutter under his breath about something dark, something waiting. I thought it was just superstition, foolishness, the sort of thing you could dismiss with a laugh and a shrug. But now, standing in the woods at the edge of that damned house, I don't know what to think anymore. I wish I could tell you I was brave, that I didn't feel a chill creeping up my spine when I looked at the place. But I do. The air is thick here, oppressive, like the weight of 1,000 eyes are watching me. The house is run down, gray wood, windows boarded up, vines creeping over every inch of it like the earth is trying to swallow it whole. And yet here I am. The night is quiet, too quiet. The wind has died and even the trees stand still, as if waiting for me. The stories always talked about how the Mothman appeared when disaster was near. A warning, a sign. But what could he be warning about here? Why this house? I don't know. I only know that it's been haunting me for weeks, ever since I stumbled across a map of old abandoned places on the internet. You can call it morbid curiosity. You can call it a mistake. Hell, you can even call it stupidity. But I had to come. I had to see. I step forward, my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. The wind stirs slightly, just enough to make the trees creak, but nothing else moves. As I get closer to the house, the ground beneath me feels uneven, like the earth is shifting, pulling me in. And then I hear it. A sound, soft at first, like a fluttering of wings. No, not wings. Something more like scratching, a dragging sound. It's faint, but it makes my heart race. My feet freeze. I tell myself it's just an animal, a raccoon or a possum, nothing to be afraid of. But then I hear it again, louder this time. The sound of something big moving in the shadows. No, this is wrong. I start to back up, my pulse thundering in my ears, but that's when I see it. At first, it's just a blur in the distance, a shadow moving across the house. But then the darkness takes shape, and I see it. The figure. Tall, too tall. The shape of a man, but wrong. So wrong. Its arms are too long, stretching far beyond the reach of any human. Its wings are spread wide, bat-like, dark as night. The moonlight hits its eyes and I feel it, the burn of those eyes. Red. They glow like embers in a fire, piercing through me, and I freeze. I can't move. I can't breathe. It sees me. It knows I'm here. Help, I whisper, but my voice sounds so small, so distant. I should run. I should scream. I should do anything, but I can't. My feet are planted to the ground, my heart pounding so hard I think it might explode. It steps closer, and I feel the weight of its gaze like a physical force. It's watching me, waiting. The world around me seems to tilt, like the ground beneath my feet is shifting, and the sky above is closing in. I want to close my eyes, but I can't. I don't know if I'll ever open them again. You shouldn't be here, it says. The voice is deep, guttural, like a rumble of thunder, like the earth itself speaking. My blood runs cold. I want to look away. I want to run, but I can't. Too late for that, it whispers, its wings flexing behind it. The sound is like tearing fabric, like the universe itself is being ripped apart. I try to back away, but my legs feel like they've turned to stone. My body won't obey me. I can't look away from those eyes, those burning, hollow eyes. The Mothman steps closer. Its wings flap once, twice, and I feel the wind from them hit my face like a slap. The smell that follows is like decay, like something dead and forgotten. I want to scream. I want to do anything, but I can't. You're mine now, it says. Its voice vibrates through my bones. The words echo in my mind, repeating over and over, growing louder, until it feels like my skull will split. I can't escape. I fall to my knees, gasping for breath. I can feel the darkness closing in on me, the weight of the Mothman's presence crushing me. Its wings flicker around me, a dark cocoon. No, please, I whisper, my voice barely audible. I didn't mean, but it's no use. The Mothman's shadow grows, swallowing the world around me. The house, the trees, the very sky, all fade into the blackness. There's nothing but him. "You've seen too much," it growls. "You've disturbed the balance." The last thing I hear is the flapping of its wings, impossibly loud, deafening. The world spins, everything blurs, and then silence. I don't know how much time has passed. I don't know if it's minutes or hours, or if I've been here 1,000 years. But when I open my eyes again, I'm still in the woods. Still at the edge of the house. It feels like the air itself is thicker now, suffocating. My skin crawls. I stand up trembling, my hands slick with sweat. My breath comes in ragged gasps. The house is still there, looming in the distance, but it feels different now. It feels like the very earth beneath my feet is breathing, like I'm not alone. And then I hear it again. A sound deep in the woods. A fluttering, a dragging. The unmistakable sound of wings. I turn, my heart racing, and there, just beyond the trees, I see it. The Mothman. His wings are blacker than the night sky, stretching wide as he steps forward. His eyes gleam, glowing red, and the world seems to warp around him. The trees bend, the ground shifts. "You're mine," he says, his voice a low growl, his presence crushing. And I realize with a sickening certainty that I'll never leave. I've seen the truth, and now I'm part of the story. I'm part of the legend. I want to scream. But it's too late. It's always too late. The Mothman's warning. I didn't believe in the Mothman. Not at first. I thought it was just another small-town legend. Another ghost story told around campfires. Passed down over generations like a worn-out blanket. I'd heard the stories growing up. The tales of a creature with wings like the night sky. With eyes that glowed like burning embers. But those were just stories, right? That's all they were. Legends. My friends used to joke about it. Dare each other to go to the woods where people claimed to have seen it. But this is different. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what I'm seeing. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. It started a few weeks ago. A late-night drive down a back road I'd taken 1,000 times. There was nothing special about it, just the usual winding curves, the dark forest on either side. The headlights of my truck cut through the darkness, the radio crackling faintly with static. But then I saw something. A shadow. It moved so fast, it was like a blur against the trees. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the empty woods. I told myself it was a deer or maybe a trick of the light, the wind. I laughed it off, tried to push it out of my mind. But every time I drove down that road after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That's when I started hearing the stories. The ones I'd dismissed before. The ones about the Mothman. About how it appeared before disaster struck. How people who saw it were doomed to suffer. The more I heard, the more I couldn't ignore it. And that's when I started seeing it again. The first time I saw it clearly, I was walking through the woods near my house. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just clearing my head. But when I turned the corner, there it was. Standing in the clearing. It wasn't just a shadow, it wasn't just a shape in the corner of my eye. It was there. A figure so tall I had to crane my neck to see its face. Its wings were outstretched, wide as the sky, blacker than anything I'd ever seen. And its eyes. God, its eyes. Red, glowing. It didn't move. Not at first, it just stood there, staring at me with those burning eyes like it was waiting for something. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but the air felt thick, heavy, like I couldn't force the words out. Then its wings moved. Just a slight flutter. But it was enough to make the world feel like it was caving in on me. "You shouldn't be here," it said. Its voice was deep, like it came from the earth itself, vibrating in my bones. I didn't run. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Vanished into the trees like it had never existed. I stood there for a long time, shaking, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I was just tired. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. It was real. It was real. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that the Mothman was always there, just out of sight, watching me. I started to hear noises at night, scratching sounds, whispers that I couldn't quite make out. But when I checked, there was nothing. No one. The unease grew, gnawing at me until I started losing sleep. I couldn't tell anyone. They'd think I was crazy. Everyone in town knew the stories, but no one took them seriously. And then it happened. The first warning. It was a Tuesday evening when I got the call. My brother, David, had been in a car accident. The phone call came in the middle of the night. The sound of my mother's voice, trembling with fear, telling me he was in critical condition. My heart dropped. David wasn't just my brother, he was my best friend. The person I'd grown up with, the one person I'd always been able to count on. He was always careful, cautious. He would never drive recklessly. He was supposed to be safe, but that night he wasn't. That night his car had veered off the road, crashing into a tree. They said the impact was so bad, they weren't sure he'd make it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help. I sat in that sterile hospital room waiting for news. The night felt heavier than before, like the air itself was charged with something dark. I thought back to the Mothman, the glowing eyes, the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. The second warning came the next day. My father, who had always been healthy, collapsed at work. They rushed him to the hospital and the doctors said it was a heart attack, a sudden severe one. They didn't know how he survived, but I did. I knew. The Mothman, the warning, the disaster. It was all connected. I couldn't sit still anymore. I knew I had to do something. I had to find answers before more people got hurt, before more people died. I went back to the woods. The sky was dark, the moon barely a sliver in the sky. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe a clue, maybe a way to stop it. But as I walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The trees bent in strange ways, twisting like they were alive. And then I heard it, the fluttering of wings. I froze. I knew what it was before I turned around. The Mothman, standing there in front of me, its wings spread wide, casting a long shadow over the ground. Its eyes, those eyes, burned with that red haunting glow. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice low, resonating in my chest. "No," I whispered, backing away. "I need to know what you want. What are you here for?" It tilted its head, studying me, its wings shifting slightly in the wind. "I am the warning," it said. "The sign of things to come. The world shifts and you cannot change it." "Why us? Why my family?" Its wings beat once, sending a ripple through the air. "Fate," it said simply. "It cannot be avoided." I felt the ground tremble beneath me. My heart raced. I realized in that moment that the Mothman wasn't just a creature. It wasn't just a legend. It was an omen, a sign that there was nothing I could do. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it, trying to find the words, trying to understand. But there was nothing more to be said. The Mothman flapped its wings and disappeared into the night, leaving me with nothing but the silence and the certainty that I was too late. When I returned home, I found out that my brother had passed away during surgery. My father's heart had stopped again, just hours after I left the woods. And now all I can think about is the Mothman's eyes. Those red, glowing eyes. I know I'll never be free of it. I've seen the warning and there's nothing I can do to stop it. The Mothman's embrace. It's funny, really. You never think the things you hear about as a kid will end up haunting you. The stories your parents tell you to keep you inside at night. The warnings whispered to you when you wander a little too far from the house. You don't think about them again, not until something happens. Not until you see it for yourself. That's how it was with the Mothman for me. I grew up hearing the stories, the ones about the creature that lived in the woods, the one with wings like the night sky and eyes that could burn a hole through you. It was a local legend, passed down like a family heirloom, but everyone laughed it off. I laughed it off. Kids, they said, just stories, until I saw it. I remember that night so clearly. It was late, probably around midnight. I'd been out with some friends, hiking along the old trails near the edge of town. We'd heard the rumors, of course, but we were more concerned with cracking open a bottle and goofing off than paying attention to any of that old, superstitious nonsense. We were up on a ridge overlooking the valley below when the air shifted. It was subtle at first, just a change in the breeze, but something in it felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't describe, but you know it when you feel it. I turned to one of my friends, ready to make some joke about the wind, when I saw him looking at something in the distance. I followed his gaze and my heart stopped. There, just beyond the trees, just on the edge of the clearing, stood a figure, tall, impossibly tall. The shadow of it loomed against the dark sky, wings outstretched. The moonlight caught on them, and for a split second, It looked like the wings were made of the night itself, a blackness that was darker than dark. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I couldn't. And then its eyes. Those glowing red eyes. I've never been more afraid in my life. My breath caught in my throat, my body frozen in place as if the sight of it had paralyzed me. My friend, Alex, started to say something, but the words caught in his throat. We all stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. But there was no sense. The Mothman's head tilted, its eyes narrowing. I could feel the weight of its gaze, like it was pressing against me, suffocating me. It was as if it could see into me, see everything I'd ever done, everything I'd ever thought. I don't remember how long we stood there, rooted in place, but when the Mothman finally moved, it was so fast it felt like the world had bent. One moment, it was standing there, staring, and the next, it was gone, swallowed by the trees. The wind picked up immediately, howling through the leaves, and we all snapped out of it. Did you see that?" Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "Yeah," I managed to say, though my voice barely sounded like mine. I was still stuck, my eyes darting over the ridge, expecting to see it again. "Yeah, I saw it, but it didn't show itself again. Not that night, not the way it had before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, in the woods, watching. I should have left, should have turned around and walked back to town, never looking back. But we didn't. We pressed on, our laughter forced, our words faltering, and yet none of us wanted to admit how terrified we were. I think we all knew what we saw. I didn't sleep that night. The image of those eyes burning into me followed me home, lingered in my mind until I couldn't think of anything else. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that it was some strange trick of the light, but it didn't feel like a trick. It felt like a warning. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled into my bones. Everywhere I went, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those red eyes following me. I thought I saw something in the distance, just out of my sight, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. It wasn't until the night of the storm that everything started to make sense. It had been raining all day, one of those torrential downpours that turned the sky into a wall of gray. I had stayed inside, trying to keep my mind off the things that had been bothering me. But around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, half expecting to find some trick-or-treaters from last year, or maybe one of my friends playing a prank. But when I opened it, there was no one there, just the rain, pouring down in sheets. And then I heard it, a fluttering sound like wings. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. The Mothman was out there. My heart began to pound. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but the fluttering didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, like the creature was circling my house. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The lights flickered once, twice, before going out completely, plunging the house into darkness. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, low, deep, hollow. "You can't escape!" I spun around, but there was no one there. The sound of the wings was so close now, so loud, I could feel the air shift with each beat. Thump, thump. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I turned toward the window, my breath caught in my throat, and I saw it. The Mothman. Its wings spread wide, the blackness of them swallowing the sky. Those glowing eyes burning through the darkness locked onto mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, as if it had never been there at all, it was gone. The wind died. The rain stopped. The air went still. But I knew it wasn't over. The Mothman wasn't here to play. He wasn't here to scare me for fun. He was here for something else. I didn't know what, but I knew it was coming. I think about that night every day, about the creature in the woods, the one that told me I couldn't escape, the one that's still out there watching, waiting. I thought I was safe when I moved to the city, but it follows me everywhere. The darkness, the fluttering. I don't know how much longer I can outrun it. I don't know if I even want to, because I know deep down that I'll never escape the Mothman. And one day I won't be able to outrun his wings. The Mothman's shadow. I never believed in the Mothman. Not really. Growing up in a small town like mine, you hear all the urban legends. The haunted forests, the cursed roads, the things that go bump in the night. But I always thought they were just stories. People need something to talk about, something to make them feel alive. That's all I ever thought. That was until it started following me. I had just moved back to my hometown after a few years of living in the city. My life had become a blur of deadlines, social media, and the kind of noise that drowns out everything else. But when my mom passed away, I decided I needed to get away from the chaos. I needed to return to my roots, to the place I grew up in, the place that felt like home. Or at least that's what I thought. The first few days were calm. I settled back into the old house, took long walks by the creek, and reacquainted myself with the woods that bordered our town. Everything felt oddly familiar, but there was an unsettling quiet, like something was off. But I dismissed it. That's just the way it is when you return after years of absence. You notice things differently. Then the nightmares started. It began with vague flashes of images, strange shadows flitting between trees, eyes burning in the dark. But every night it became clearer. There was something out there, something watching me, something wrong. The worst part? I didn't wake up screaming or sweating like you'd expect from a nightmare. I woke up staring, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, frozen, unable to move. And when I closed my eyes again, the thing from the dream was still there, lingering just behind my eyelids. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress of the move, the change in my life. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The first time I saw it in the daylight, I was walking along the old trail near the woods. I'd taken the same route when I was a kid, the path worn into the earth from years of foot traffic. It was a beautiful afternoon, the sun shining through the leaves, and I was trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But as I walked, I felt that same creeping sense of dread that I couldn't shake, the kind that burrows under your skin, making the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I stopped suddenly as I felt it, a presence, a heavy, unnatural stillness in the air. The wind had died, the rustling of the trees had stopped, and there, standing just beyond the line of trees, was something massive. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It was like a shadow cast by something too large to see, a shape that barely registered in the periphery of my vision. Its wings were folded against its body, but they stretched out far beyond anything human, dark as night itself. And its eyes, they glowed red and cold like they were burning holes through my soul. The moment our eyes met, I felt it, a deep, suffocating dread that wrapped around my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was like the air itself was closing in on me, squeezing me tight. I froze, my legs refusing to move. My mind screamed at me to run, to turn and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even think. Then, without a sound, it was gone, vanished into the trees as though it had never been there at all. The wind picked back up and the forest returned to its normal rhythm, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back home, hands shaking, heart racing, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I knew I had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But I knew the truth. It had been real, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for me. That night, I stayed in. The weight of the encounter pressed down on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even inside my own house. The house that had been my refuge, my sanctuary from everything I left behind, now felt like a prison. The nightmares grew worse. I'd wake up in the dead of night, my heart pounding in my chest, as though something were right there, just outside my window. I could feel its eyes on me, staring, watching. I tried to call my old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, but every conversation felt hollow, disconnected. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was happening. I didn't want to sound crazy. That's when I started hearing things. The tapping on my windows, light at first, like a branch scraping against the glass. But it wasn't the wind. I could hear it clearly. Tap, tap, tap. I went outside, terrified of what I might find, but there was nothing. Just the empty night. Then the voice came, low, soft, whispering like it was right behind me, breathing my name. I whirled around, heart pounding, but nothing was there. I couldn't escape it, and I tried to leave. I packed my things. I tried to find somewhere, anywhere else to go. But as I drove away, I saw it again. There, standing in the trees on the edge of town, wings outstretched in the moonlight. The Mothman, its eyes burning, glowing red as it stared right at me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I sped past it, my heart racing. But no matter how fast I drove, it felt like it was always there, always watching. The next day, I found out about the accident. A woman, a family I'd known when I was younger, had driven off the road and crashed into a tree. They didn't survive. It was a terrible accident, a tragedy. And then I remembered. The Mothman, the omen, the creature that appeared before disaster struck. It was a warning. But who would listen? Who would ever believe? That's when it all hit me. The nightmares, the tapping, the whispers, the thing I saw in the woods. It wasn't just following me. It was a sign, a warning that something terrible was coming, and I was its target.
Nope.
I'm sitting here now, writing this, trying to make sense of everything that's happened. I don't know how to escape it. I don't know if I can. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Every time I step outside, I feel its presence. The Mothman is out there, waiting for me, waiting for whatever disaster is coming. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that it's just getting started. The Mothman's warning. You never really think it's going to happen to you, do you? The stories, the rumors, they're just things you hear in passing, not real, not ever really real. That's how I lived my life, at least. I'd heard about the Mothman, of course. Everyone has. It's one of those local legends that gets passed down like a cursed heirloom. Some people swear they've seen it, others scoff. And I was always the one in the middle, shrugging it off as just a scary story.
Not bad.
But after what happened to me, I don't know if I can ever think that way again. It was late autumn when I first saw it. The leaves were turning, the air was crisp, and the world felt quiet in that way that only happens when the seasons change. I'd gone out for a walk, taking the old trail that cut through the woods behind my house. It was a familiar route, one I'd taken 1,000 times before. But that day felt different.
No.
I'd barely been walking for 15 minutes when I felt it. That sensation you get when someone's watching you. At first, I brushed it off. The woods are full of creatures after all. Birds, squirrels, even the occasional deer. But this wasn't like that. This felt wrong. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I stopped walking just for a moment, trying to shake the feeling. And then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw something in the distance. At first, it was just a dark shape against the trees, too far away to make out clearly. But then it moved. It shifted, and I realized, with a jolt in my chest, that it wasn't an animal. It was something else. I've heard people say that when you see the Mothman, you'll know. And God help me, they were right. There was no mistaking it. It was huge, much larger than any bird I've ever seen, with wings that stretched far beyond its body, folding and unfolding like something out of a nightmare. The wings were dark, almost black, blending in with the shadows of the forest. But there was something unnatural about them. And its eyes, those glowing red eyes. They were like twin fires burning in the dark, staring directly at me, piercing through me. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey, frozen in place as I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been real, but it was. The creature didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching me. And then, without any warning, it took flight. The air shifted around me as its massive wings beat, creating a sound that seemed to reverberate through my bones. I wanted to run, but my legs were like lead. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it as it soared into the air, vanishing into the thick canopy above. When it was gone, the silence was deafening. No birds, no rustling of leaves, nothing. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, feeling as though the world had stopped spinning. It took everything in me to turn and walk back down the trail, but I didn't dare look back. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind, felt like it was carrying the weight of that thing's presence. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, a hallucination, maybe even a prank. But deep down I knew better. I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't over.
No.
For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The nightmares started soon after. Vivid, terrifying dreams of the Mothman following me, chasing me through the woods, its wings fluttering louder than my heart. And every time I woke up, I felt like it was still there, standing just outside my window, waiting. I told no one. Who would believe me? The Mothman was just a myth, wasn't it? Just a silly story passed down from generation to generation to scare kids into behaving. But I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake him. Then the strange things started happening. It began small, things out of place, noises in the night. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But one night, I was sitting in my living room when I heard it. A tapping. Soft at first, like a light knock on the window. I went to check, but nothing was there. No bird, no branch, nothing. I shrugged it off, trying to calm myself, but the tapping came again. Louder this time. I moved to the window, my heart racing. I didn't want to look, but something forced me to. And when I did, I saw it. The Mothman. It was standing there just outside the edge of the trees, its wings folded against its back. Those eyes glowing in the darkness, staring right at me. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like the air itself was suffocating me. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. It didn't move, didn't even flinch. It just stood there watching me as if it were waiting for something. Waiting for me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in terror, but eventually the creature stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the night. And with it, the silence returned. I ran out of the house the next morning. I didn't care where I went as long as it was away from that thing. But the feeling never left me. It followed me. Everywhere I went, I felt those eyes on me, as though the Mothman was never far behind. And then, the warning came. It was a week later when the news hit. A local family, a few miles from my house, had been involved in a terrible car accident. The wreck was bad, the kind of bad where no one survives. I remember standing there reading the report when it hit me. The Mothman was a harbinger, an omen of disaster. The creature wasn't there to attack. It was there to warn. And that family, those poor souls, hadn't heeded the warning. I don't know what I expected, but the news hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a random thing. The Mothman had been trying to warn me, trying to get me to understand. And it hadn't just been watching me. It had been watching all of us. I couldn't stay there any longer. The weight of it all, of knowing the Mothman had been close, that I had seen it, that it was still waiting, was too much to bear. I packed my things and left that night, leaving behind the house, the woods, and the small town that I had once called home. But even now, even here, I can still feel it. Every time I look out the window, I feel that same sensation, that weight in the air, the feeling of being watched, and I know deep down that I'll never escape it. Because the Mothman isn't just a creature. He's a warning, a reminder. And no matter where I go, I'll never forget those eyes. Because one day it might be me, the next target, the shadow beyond the creek. I grew up in a small town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the secrets seem to come from the earth itself. People would say, "Oh, this town's been here a long time, you know." And sometimes they'd add in a warning, like it was meant to be comforting, like it was the reason why we all stayed. But I didn't see it back then. I was just a kid, full of curiosity, hungry to explore the woods behind my house. My friends and I would go on adventures, pretending to be explorers, daring each other to walk deeper into the forest, right up to the creek that ran behind the old mill. But as I grew older, the stories of the Mothman became more frequent, more insistent. Everyone had a tale, some distant cousin, a friend of a friend, a neighbor's uncle, all of them swearing they saw it. This creature, huge and dark, with wings like the span of a barn door, eyes glowing like coals. The warnings came in whispers, as if speaking it aloud might summon it. "Don't go too far into the woods," they'd say. "Stay away from the creek at night." And for a long time, I thought it was just another legend. People here like their spooky stories, and that's all it ever seemed to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just talk. It wasn't the kids at school whispering that got to me. It was the way the elders spoke, their voices cracking when they said, "The Mothman watches." I didn't believe them at first. How could I? It was just another ghost story, right? That was until I saw it. It started small, strange things just outside my window, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision. At night, I'd hear tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Like something was brushing against the glass. But when I checked, there was nothing there. Just the wind. Maybe a branch swaying in the trees. But it was never just the wind. I knew that. I could feel it. Something was watching me. Waiting. One night, I decided to go out for a walk to clear my head. The air was cool, crisp with the scent of fall. The woods were still, silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. so I kept walking. The creek wasn't far, just a few minutes from my house. I remember hearing it first. The gurgling water, the occasional snap of a twig beneath someone's foot. But then, the air felt heavy. Too still. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. I stepped closer to the water, the dark reflection of the trees making the creek seem deeper, more dangerous than I remembered. It was then that I saw it, just for a moment, something out of place on the opposite bank. A figure blacker than the night around it, standing still in the shadows. The wings, those wings, were what struck me first. They were so wide, stretching from the figure's back like some grotesque angelic creature. The wings twitched, and I swear to God I felt the air move. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees in a split second. My heart hammered in my chest, and before I could even think, my legs carried me backward, away from the creek, away from that thing. But I couldn't move fast enough. I wasn't fast enough. I stumbled. My feet caught on the uneven ground, and I fell hard onto the dirt. That's when I heard it. The sound I'll never forget. Flap, flap, flap. It was like a storm had suddenly erupted around me, the wind howling as though the thing was coming closer. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me, and when I looked back, it was gone. The creek, the trees, the silence. Nothing. Just the cold air pressing against my skin. I ran. I didn't look back. When I got home, I bolted the door behind me and locked every window. I couldn't breathe, couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't concentrate at work. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Those glowing red eyes. And in the quiet, in the dark, I could still hear the flapping of those monstrous wings, getting closer. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. It was just the stress. But then the whispers started. They weren't in my head. They were real, coming from outside. It's watching you. It's waiting for you. I could hear the voice, low and guttural, like the rumbling of thunder in the distance. It was close, too close. I tried to get help. I went to the town's old library, searching for answers, looking for anything that might explain what I was feeling, what was happening to me. I found the old journals, some dating back to the early 1900s, filled with accounts of strange sightings. People had seen the Mothman before, always before something terrible happened. People had died. And that's when the realization hit me. The Mothman wasn't just a warning. It was a predator, a harbinger of death. I'd heard the stories. I'd laughed them off. But now, I understood. It was too late. I was already marked. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings kept happening. The shadow at the edge of my window, the tapping on the walls, the whispers in the night. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't escape it. The Mothman had found me, and I could feel it getting closer each passing day. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew it was coming. I could hear its wings, feel its presence, like the air itself had thickened with dread. It was the night of the full moon, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something I couldn't stop. I went to the creek. The air was suffocating. The silence was unbearable. I stood there, just staring at the dark water, my breath shallow and uneven, waiting for something to happen. I could hear the creek gurgling in the background, but it felt wrong, like the sound was coming from far away. And then I saw it. There, in the shadows, the Mothman stood. Those eyes, that figure towering above me. It was real. It was here. You shouldn't have come. The voice, the whisper. It was real. And it was coming from inside my mind now, crawling in like some horrible disease. The Mothman flapped its wings once, twice, each beat like thunder. The air around me vibrated with its power, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything but stand there and watch as it came closer, as its wings spread wide. And then the earth shook. There was a sound, a terrible crack like the world was breaking. And in that instant, everything went dark. The next morning, they found the wreckage. The bridge, the one on the old highway, had collapsed. People had died. The local news reported it as an accident, a freak occurrence. But I knew the truth. The Mothman had been there. It had warned me. It had killed. But I had survived. Somehow. I don't know how, but I did. But I don't think it's over. It's still out there, in the shadows, waiting for the next disaster. And I can feel it, even now. Every time the wind picks up, every time the night grows still, I know it's watching. The Mothman is still here and it's waiting for me.